If you told me a month ago that our 15-year anniversary trip would end with me sitting alone, unraveling my marriage in my head, I would have laughed. Agatha and I had our issues. What couple doesn't after 15 years? But I never thought it would come to this. I didn't think she was capable of it. Or maybe I didn't want to believe she was. The trip was supposed to be a reset. Agatha had insisted on something special to mark the occasion, and after weeks of her nagging, I caved. We booked a week at a beachfront resort that promised all the luxury and tranquility money could buy. Stella, our 14-year-old daughter, stayed behind with my parents and grandparents. Agatha had insisted she needed the time to focus on us, though in hindsight, I wonder if she just wanted fewer eyes on her. Stella didn't mind staying back. She loves her grandparents and was thrilled to spend the week baking with my mom and listening to my dad's endless stories about his younger years. I figured it would be good for her, and honestly, I thought it would be good for us too. Maybe some time away from the daily grind would remind Agatha why we got married in the first place. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong the moment we arrived at the hotel. Agatha, as usual, found something to complain about before we even got to our room. The check-in process was too slow, the lobby was too crowded, and the welcome drinks were too sweet. I'd spent years tolerating her constant criticisms, chalking them up to her personality, but something about the way she carried herself this time felt different. Like she was looking for flaws just to draw attention to herself. That's when we met Victor, the hotel manager. He swooped in, all charm and poise, apologizing for the minor inconveniences and promising to personally ensure our stay was perfect. He was polished with the kind of smile that seemed practiced but effective. Agatha's mood shifted almost immediately. She went from irritated to almost delighted, flashing Victor a rare smile as she complimented his professionalism. It was a small moment, but one that stuck with me. The first few days passed uneventfully. I tried to make the best of the trip, lounging by the pool and taking in the ocean view, while Agatha found new things to critique. The food wasn't up to her standards, the bed was too soft, the spa treatments were overpriced. It was the usual routine, and I found myself tuning it out more and more. I'd expected this. Agatha's dissatisfaction had become a constant hum in our marriage, like background noise you learn to live with. But then little things started standing out. Agatha seemed to perk up whenever Victor was around. She'd laugh at his jokes, linger a little too long when they spoke, and even made a point of thanking him personally whenever he resolved one of her complaints. At first, I thought she was just being polite, but there was a spark in her demeanor that I hadn't seen in years, a spark that wasn't directed at me. I tried to brush it off. After all, we were on vacation, and maybe Agatha was just enjoying the attention after years of feeling unfulfilled. But as the days went on, her behavior became harder to ignore. She started volunteering to handle things like scheduling spa appointments or asking the front desk for extra towels, tasks she would normally complain about. She'd disappear for stretches of time, always returning with vague explanations about running into Victor and chatting about the hotel's amenities. It wasn't just her behavior that fell off. It was her appearance, too. Agatha started dressing up more for dinner, choosing outfits that seemed more suited for a date night than a casual resort meal. She began wearing perfume daily, even when we weren't leaving the room. When I commented on how nice she looked, she brushed it off, saying she just wanted to feel good on vacation. By the fourth night, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. That evening, we went to one of the resort's upscale restaurants for dinner. Victor stopped by our table to ask how our stay was going, and Agatha lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She laughed at everything he said, her gaze lingering on him long after he left. I felt like an outsider watching a conversation I wasn't meant to be part of. Later that night, Agatha claimed she wasn't feeling well and stayed behind in the room while I went to the bar. I didn't buy her excuse, but I didn't push. Sitting alone with a drink, I tried to make sense of everything. The stolen glances, the extended conversations, the way she seemed to come alive in Victor's presence. Was I overthinking, or was there something more going on? When you're married to someone like Agatha, appearances are everything. She's the kind of person who thrives on being seen as the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect woman. It's like her entire identity is wrapped up in what other people think of her. And on this trip, She turned that need for public perfection up to 11. From the moment we arrived at the resort, Agatha acted like she was auditioning for some kind of Wife of the Year award. It wasn't just the way she dressed or the way she carried herself. It was the little performances she put on in front of the staff, the other guests, and especially Victor, the hotel manager. She went out of her way to seem attentive, devoted, and, dare I say it, adoring. It would have been sweet if it didn't feel so calculated. At breakfast, she'd make a big show of asking me how I slept, pouring my coffee, and even making small comments about how hard I worked and how much I deserved this vacation. If someone complimented her on her dress, she'd laugh and say something like, "Oh, my husband loves this one. It's his favorite." To anyone watching, we probably looked like the picture-perfect couple. But I knew better. These weren't genuine moments of affection. They were part of the image she wanted to project. Her behavior was most noticeable during our interactions with Victor. Every time he appeared, Agatha seemed to shift gears, turning up the charm and leaning into her role as the devoted wife. She'd gush about how much we were enjoying the resort, how grateful she was for all his help, and how it had been exactly the romantic getaway we needed. She'd laugh a little too hard at his jokes, touch my arm as if to emphasize our connection, and flash him the kind of smiles that felt rehearsed. At first, I thought she was just trying to make a good impression. But the more I watched, the more it felt like her performances weren't for my benefit at all. They were for him. She wasn't just trying to seem like the perfect wife. She was trying to seem like the kind of wife he might want. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. One afternoon, we were lounging by the pool when Victor came by to check on us. Agatha immediately perked up, sitting straighter and adjusting her sunglasses in that effortless way that made it seem like she was casually glowing. She thanked him for fixing a minor issue with our room, a complaint she'd manufactured, no doubt, and went on about how much she appreciated his attention to detail. Her tone was light and friendly, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something that made my stomach tighten. When Victor left, she turned to me with a satisfied smile, as if expecting me to praise her for how charming she'd been. I played along, but inside I was unraveling. The way she'd spoken to him, the way she seemed to light up in his presence, it wasn't normal. It wasn't how a wife should behave in front of her husband, especially not on their anniversary trip. As the days went on, her efforts to maintain the perfect wife facade became almost exhausting to watch. She'd hold my hand in public, but barely acknowledge me when we were alone. She'd insist on taking photos of us together, only to spend more time staring at her phone than talking to me. She'd laugh loudly at other people's jokes, but barely crack a smile when I tried to make conversation. It felt like I was a prop in her carefully curated image, not her husband. The disconnect between her public persona and her private behavior was glaring. In front of others, she'd be sweet and doting, always quick to compliment me or make a show of how much she adored me. But behind closed doors, she was distant, cold even. Her tone was clipped, her responses short, and her focus elsewhere. It was like she was two different people, and I was starting to see which version of her was real. One evening, we attended a cocktail hour hosted by the hotel. Agatha was in her element, gliding through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing me to other guests and throwing compliments my way like confetti. She laughed at my jokes, touched my arm just enough to seem affectionate, and even raised her glass in a toast to 15 wonderful years with the most hard-working man I know. The crowd clapped, and for a moment, I almost believed it. Almost. But then I caught her glancing at Victor across the room, her expression shifting ever so slightly. It wasn't much, just a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Admiration? Longing? Guilt? Whatever it was enough to make my chest tighten. I smiled through the rest of the evening, but my mind was racing. The cracks in Agatha's performance were starting to show, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing just beneath the surface. Her public devotion, her constant need to seem like the perfect wife, it all felt like a distraction, a way to hide whatever was really going on. I was sitting on the balcony, staring out at the ocean, trying to make sense of Agatha's behavior over the past few days. The resort was as beautiful as promised. White sand beaches, crystal clear water, and sunsets that looked like they belonged on a postcard. But all I could feel was this gnawing unease, this sense that something wasn't right. That's when my phone buzzed. It was Stella. Seeing her name on the screen was like a small lifeline, a reminder of the one constant in my life that hadn't been tainted by doubt. I picked up, expecting her usual cheerful chatter about what she'd been up to with my parents and grandparents. But her tone was different, quieter, more hesitant. She started by asking how the trip was going, her voice light, but a little distant. I told her everything was fine, though even as I said it, I felt the weight of the lie. Then she got to the point. She asked if I could tell Mom to call her because she hadn't heard from her since we left. I froze. I knew Agatha hadn't been spending much time on her phone, but I'd assumed she'd been in touch with Stella, even briefly. After all, she'd insisted Stella stay with my parents so we could focus on us, and yet she hadn't made the effort to check in with the daughter she claimed to need a break from. I felt a pang of guilt, realizing I hadn't thought to ask about it earlier. Stella went on, her voice trembling slightly as she explained how she'd tried calling Agatha several times. She'd left messages, sent texts, and even asked my mom if maybe something had happened to her phone. But there'd been no response, no acknowledgement at all. Stella didn't sound angry, just hurt, and that made it so much worse. I reassured Stella as best as I could, promising to talk to her mom and make sure she called. She said she missed us, though the way she said us made it clear who she really meant. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the ocean, but not really seeing it. Agatha hadn't called her daughter. She hadn't checked in, hadn't bothered to return her calls. The woman who insisted she needed time to focus on her family couldn't even manage to call the one person who needed her most. It wasn't just neglect, it felt like something deeper, something intentional. I thought about the way Agatha had been acting since we arrived at the resort. The constant need to appear perfect in front of others. The way she seemed to light up around Victor, the growing distance between us in private. It all painted a picture I didn't want to see. And now, knowing she'd completely ignored Stella, that picture felt even clearer. After I got off the phone, I went back inside to find Agatha lounging on the bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly when I walked in, but didn't say anything. I wanted to confront her, to ask why she hadn't called Stella, why she was so focused on everything but her own family. But I held back. Not yet. I needed more. Instead, I mentioned that I'd just spoken to Stella and that she'd asked why her mom hadn't called. Agatha barely reacted. She mumbled something about being busy and said she'd call later, though her tone made it clear she didn't consider it a priority. That moment stuck with me. How casual she was about something so important, how easily she brushed off the feelings of her own daughter. The rest of the day felt heavier. Every smile Agatha gave, every laugh she forced, every effort she made to seem like the perfect wife felt hollow. I couldn't stop thinking about Stella's voice on the phone, the hurt in her words, and the realization that her mother's priorities had shifted in a way neither of us could fully understand yet. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, I thought about all the little moments that had led us here. The cracks in Agatha's behavior, the way she seemed to light up around Victor, the way she distanced herself from her family while pretending to be the perfect wife. And now, the way she completely ignored Stella, the one person who should have been at the center of her thoughts. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. But this wasn't just about me anymore. Agatha's choices weren't just affecting our marriage. They were hurting Stella. And that was something I couldn't ignore. By the 5th day of the trip, the resort's stunning views and luxurious amenities felt like a cruel backdrop to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Agatha was still putting on her performance, smiling and laughing when we were in public, but I couldn't unsee the cracks in her facade. The phone call with Stella weighed on me heavily, and Agatha's dismissal of her own daughter's feelings had only solidified my growing suspicion that her priorities were anywhere but on her family. It was around this time that I started noticing something strange with the staff. At first, it was subtle. A second glance from a housekeeper as I walked by, a fleeting look exchanged between 2 servers in the dining area. I brushed it off as paranoia, telling myself I was imagining things. But as the day went on, it became harder to ignore. During breakfast, I walked past 2 staff members near the buffet, their conversation halting abruptly as I approached. They glanced at me, then quickly looked away, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Later at the pool, a server taking my drink order hesitated when I asked for the check, her eyes darting toward the manager's office before she hurried away. It was the kind of behavior you notice only when you're already on edge, and it set my nerves buzzing. The turning point came that evening. Agatha had gone to the spa for yet another treatment, leaving me alone to wander the resort. As I passed by the lobby, I noticed two receptionists at the front desk whispering to each other. One of them saw me and nudged the other, who quickly straightened up and forced a smile. They greeted me politely, but their eyes betrayed them. They knew something they weren't saying. The pattern repeated itself throughout the evening. Whether it was the bellhop who avoided eye contact as he passed me in the hallway, or the bartender who seemed unusually hesitant to engage in small talk, there was a shift in the air, a quiet tension that followed me wherever I went. It felt like I was the punchline to a joke everyone else was in on, and the realization made my stomach churn. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was going on, it wasn't just in my head anymore. The staff's behavior was too consistent, too pointed to be a coincidence. They knew something about Agatha, or about me, and their whispers and stolen glances only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. That night, Agatha returned from the spa looking refreshed and cheerful, as if she hadn't a care in the world. She went on about how relaxing her treatment had been, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I watched her carefully, noting how at ease she seemed, how disconnected she was from the tension I'd been feeling all day. It was infuriating. I decided to keep quiet for now. If the staff knew something, I needed to figure out what it was without tipping off Agatha. I spent the rest of the evening observing her, watching for any signs that she might sense what was happening around us. But she remained blissfully unaware, smiling and chatting as if everything was perfectly fine. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed the day's events in my mind. The whispers, the stolen glances, the tension that seemed to follow me everywhere. It all pointed to something bigger than just my suspicions. The staff knew something about Agatha, and whatever it was only a matter of time before I found out. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The lies, the distance, the way Agatha seemed more invested in maintaining her public image than in being a wife or mother. It was all becoming too much. But I knew one thing for certain. The truth was out there, and I was closer than ever to finding it. That night, the unease that had been building all week finally reached a breaking point. Agatha was acting as if nothing was wrong, smiling, chatting, and planning the next day's activities as though she weren't avoiding every meaningful part of her life. After dinner, she claimed she needed some air and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I'd grown used to these disappearing acts, but this time, something told me I shouldn't ignore it. I decided to take a walk around the resort. It had become my routine during this trip, wandering the grounds at night, trying to make sense of the growing pile of doubts in my head. The resort was quiet, the pools reflecting the moonlight, and the ocean waves faint in the background. I didn't have a plan, just a need to clear my mind. As I passed the main pool area, something caught my eye. A faint glow came from one of the private cabanas near the water, the fabric curtains slightly parted. Inside, two figures were close, too close. My heart raced as I stepped closer, keeping to the shadows. The couple didn't seem to notice me, too caught up in each other to pay attention to their surroundings. Then I saw her. It was Agatha, leaning into Victor, the hotel manager. They were sitting together on the cushioned bench, her hand resting on his knee, his arm draped casually around her shoulders. She was laughing softly, her face inches from his. And then, without hesitation, she kissed him. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. There it was, the confirmation I'd been dreading, right in front of me. The wife I'd spent 15 years with, the woman who'd insisted we take this trip to reconnect, was kissing another man in the very resort where we were supposed to be celebrating our marriage. I stood frozen for a moment, torn between anger and heartbreak. But then a calmness washed over me, an almost unnatural clarity. This wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. If I wanted to confront Agatha, I needed evidence, something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or deny. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I opened the camera. I snapped photo after photo, making sure to capture every detail, The intimacy of their poses, the kiss, the way they looked at each other. Each click of the shutter felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage, but I didn't stop. This was my proof, and I wasn't leaving without it. Once I had what I needed, I turned and walked away, my chest tight, but my mind surprisingly clear. I headed straight for the bar, needing something, anything, to dull the edges of what I'd just witnessed. The bartender poured me a drink, but I barely tasted it. My phone sat on the counter, the photos staring back at me, each one a stark reminder of what I'd lost. As I nursed my drink, my phone buzzed. It was Stella. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I could keep it together, but I answered. The sound of her voice, trembling and tearful, hit me harder than anything else that night. She said she'd seen something on social media, a photo of her mother kissing an unknown man. Someone had taken it and posted it, tagging the resort. Stella had been scrolling innocently when it popped up, and now she was crying, asking me why her mom was doing this, what it meant, and why she hadn't called her all week. I felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. Agatha's actions weren't just hurting me. They were tearing apart the one person who deserved better than any of this. I wanted to tell Stella everything, to explain what was happening, but I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I reassured her as best as I could, promising her that I'd handle it and that she didn't need to worry. When we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my drink and replaying everything in my mind. The pictures on my phone, Stella's tearful voice, the betrayal I'd just witnessed. It all felt overwhelming, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't just acting for myself anymore. I was acting for Stella, for the life we deserved to rebuild without Agatha's selfishness poisoning it. He hurt, the betrayal, the anger. It was all still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now it was joined by something stronger, resolve. I wasn't going to waste another second pretending this marriage could be saved. Agatha had made her choices, and now she was going to face the consequences. I packed my things quietly, careful not to wake her. The photos I'd taken the night before were still on my phone, but I wanted to make sure she saw them before I left. I printed them at the hotel's business center, each image a stark reminder of the betrayal she probably thought I'd never uncover. I placed the stack of photos on the nightstand, directly under the note I'd written. You made your choices. Now live with them. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. By the time Agatha woke up, I was already gone, on my way to the airport. I canceled her return ticket before I left, ensuring she wouldn't have an easy way back. She'd have to figure that out on her own. A small taste of the chaos she'd created for our family. On the flight home, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. I knew the hardest part was still ahead, explaining everything to Stella, starting the divorce process, and rebuilding the life Agatha had shattered. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. When I got home, Stella was waiting for me. She'd clearly been crying, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed, but she managed a small smile when she saw me. I hugged her tightly, promising her that we were going to be okay. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I made it clear that her mom's actions had consequences and that I was going to do whatever it took to protect her and give her the stability she deserved. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I filed for divorce immediately, armed with the evidence I'd gathered. Agatha tried to contact me, but I ignored her calls and emails. She even tried to show up at the house, but I'd already changed the locks. Her desperation only grew when she realized she had no access to our joint accounts. I'd made sure to secure our finances before leaving the resort. She was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions, and I didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. The court proceedings were surprisingly smooth. The evidence of Agatha's infidelity made it clear who was at fault, and her neglect of Stella only strengthened my case for full custody. The judge granted me primary custody, with Agatha receiving limited visitation rights. She fought for more, but her actions spoke louder than her words. In the end, she lost everything: her family, her home, and the respect of the people who once cared about her. As I reflect on everything that happened, I've realized just how much I learned from this experience. Betrayal is a painful thing, but it also has a way of revealing the truth about others and about yourself. Finally, I've learned that letting go is the greatest act of strength. Holding on to anger and resentment only keeps you trapped in the past. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward, to build a life that's better and brighter than the one you left behind. Agatha's actions may have ended our marriage, but they didn't break me. Stella and I are stronger than ever, and our home is filled with the love and laughter that Agatha's lies once overshadowed. For anyone out there facing a betrayal like this, know that you're not alone. The road ahead won't be easy, but it will lead you to a better place. You deserve peace, happiness, and a life free from lies. Don't settle for anything less.